Hello, my name is Amy Wood. I'm Executive Director of the Raymond A. Wood Foundation, and I'm here today with Holly Gainsboro. Holly is founder of Golden Heart Grief Support and Education. She's a certified grief support specialist and grief educator whose work is deeply informed by personal experience, as her late husband Stephen passed away from glioblastoma in 2010. And since then, Holly has dedicated her life to supporting others navigating grief, especially those affected by brain tumors. Holly has been working with our patient and caregiver community since for about 6 months or so. And we wanted to bring her on today just to talk about the grief process, about dealing with grief, particularly in our experience, and also to talk about being a part of our conference coming up in November. So thank you for being with us today, Holly.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What drew you to grief support, and particularly with brain tumor families? So tell us your story.
So February 12th, 2009, my late husband, Stephen Gainsboro, was diagnosed with glioblastoma. So that's the beginning of the story. And that's the story that sort of leans into the work I do now. You know, I think anybody who has either been diagnosed with a disease, whether it's a brain tumor or something else, or a loved one with a disease, there are dates you just don't forget. And diagnosis date is one of them. And I know within the brain tumor community, certainly, and within your community at Raymond A. Wood Foundation, nobody forgets when they heard that diagnosis. So that's the date that this all began to unfold in my world. And that's when my grief began, although I have shared many times that I didn't know I was grieving. Well, I had experienced grief many times during my life before Stephen's diagnosis. You know, I had grandparents die. My uncle Eddie, my father's younger brother, died from glioblastoma in 1989. So, which is like crazy to think, you know, twice in one lifetime, but not blood related, you know, obviously with Stephen. And what's fascinating is that it was really pretty much exactly 20 years apart, 1989 to 2009. And treatments haven't really changed a whole lot in 20 years. So now what I would say, and when I work with people, is where I was in my grief was anticipatory grief. I just didn't know that because I didn't know, like so many people don't know, that you can have a non-death loss and you can have a grief response to that event. So diagnosis, what was the grief and what was the anticipation? The anticipatory piece of it was, what do we do now? What is this going to look like? We're on this path. You know, we have kids, 6th grade, 10th grade, and we're on this path and we're in a good place in our marriage. And now what? Like all these dreams and all these hopes, and I say this to so many people, and all those expectations of what life is supposed to look like has now shifted off its axis. So here we are with this diagnosis, and what do we do next? So got him the care. I won't go into the whole story, but got him the care he needed, got him to the right place. He had a couple of surgeries, recurrences, and he died December 11th, 2010. So for 22 months, I was his care partner, and I was also his caregiver. You know, I care partner is like the big buzz terminology now, and I really like that. I also think that we can't forget the caregiving part, right? I partnered with him for his care, advocated for him, took care of his appointments, and did all these things, but I also gave care to him, which are sort of, in my mind, in the work I do, feels like two different things, you know, that sort of just merged together. So when Stephen died, I found myself really pulled to be present for other people. And I wasn't really completely sure what that looked like, but I'd always been that way. I always wanted to support other people wherever they were going. It wasn't just grief, just I found myself always wanting to chat with people, see where they are and how can I support them. I was that friend everybody came to. You know, what do I do? What do you think? And so after he died, I thought about getting an MSW and going into grief world that way, becoming a therapist. That didn't pan out for a couple of different reasons, but one of the reasons is that the school that I wanted to go to, which was near my home, would not accept all my college credits. I always joke around saying, well, I was like 52, 53 when I went to do that. So I guess they must have expired or something. And I wasn't going to do general ed all over again. So my best friend, I had this gentleman who is my best friend, who is now my husband. I am remarried. And Joe his late wife died not quite a year and a half after Stephen, and she died from a different kind of cancer. But he kept pushing me to do something. Like, you're so present for people, you need to do something with this. So because the MSW wasn't going to work out, I just started exploring different grief certification trainings. How can I hold space for other people? So over a decade now, I've been doing this work for like 11 and a half years. I have received many certifications, which is even better, honestly, because as a therapist, you kind of have a lane that you need to stick in as far as working within one state, being licensed in one state. And when people go for their MSWs, there's no required course of study for grief and loss, like none, except for maybe they take a course in death and dying. So this was great for me. I see so many therapists take the certification trainings I'm taking. So I can talk to anybody. I have clients all over the country. I now have a client in the UK. So now I've gone international. So that is the long and short of it. Of how did I get into this? I was very encouraged by my husband, Joe, when we were just friends and then engaged. And then once we got married. But I always knew that there was a pull for me to be present for other people and to bear witness to their pain. And grief is so heavy and so hard and so isolating, and nobody should have to do it by themselves.
That's amazing that you were able to kind of take this experience and turn it into something that's good for, other people. Talk about that, because I think that's, a really important thing to note, is that you went through this firsthand, had this experience, and now you're working with brain tumor families and helping them through their journey of grief. What is that like for you now?
And I call that going from pain to purpose, that finding meaning in my experience. Not everybody needs to find that meaning. Not everybody needs to support other people. People find other ways within their own journey in grief, with their own journey with a loved one with a brain tumor, or even if it's a patient with a brain tumor, because they're grieving too. So finding that way. So for me, it just was like this natural progression. I can't even tell you it why or what. It just happened. I just knew that's what I was supposed to be doing. I knew within the core of my being that it was my soul's purpose now. That what Stephen and I and what our kids went through, and certainly what Stephen experienced, and then me as his caregiver, it couldn't be for nothing. Like, there had to be something bigger for me. Like I said, it doesn't have to be that for anybody else. But for me, it was the way I knew I could honor him best. Number one, by living my life, but by living my life to be of service. And so that was really it. Stephen was an amazing human being. And him being diagnosed, and you know this, all of you in the brain tumor community know that depending on the location of the tumor, depending on the type of tumor, depending on the person, depending on DNA, all these different things, personalities can shift. And I've seen it. I have clients who their late loved one was belligerent, or they were super easy, or they were irritable, or they couldn't remember things. All different things can happen. I mean, this is the motherboard, right? All cancers stink. Brain tumors is a whole different animal, and it affects everything, the nuances of who your person is or who you are sometimes. We were very lucky that Stephen was still Stephen much of the time. And because of who he was, and from this disease that he was diagnosed with, he was able to sort of dig deep in himself and find this attitude of gratitude and this like just positive way of living and looking at life. I mean, it took him a couple of days, but it really only took him a couple of days, honestly, from diagnosis to get to there. And so again, this is how I honor him. If he can do this, and we could do this as a couple, and we did this and we did as a family, then how can I not be present for other people? I
That's
don't know if that answers the
beautiful.
question, but it's
No,
sort
it's
of,
beautiful. I think it really, um, there's so much there about just, honoring that person, and then also sharing your gifts with others. And I think one of the things that people think of grief, they think of of someone dying and grieving the loss. In our community, we kind of have these tumors are usually survivable, although we have those who have lost loved ones, whether to the tumor or to the things that have come from the tumor. So there is that very clear definition of grief, but there's also the grief of, as you mentioned, diagnosis. There's the grief of after the treatment, the person has changed. There's the grief of everything that you thought life was going to be is completely different. So there's all those shades of grief. So a lot to dive into, but just kind of talking a little bit. You've been working with our community now for about 6 months. Share a little bit about what you've seen from some of this sort of not just loss grief, but the grief of experiencing this, the diagnosis, the change after treatment, all of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. And in learning from your community, I've always known this because there are benign brain tumors, not just the craniopharyngiomas and the hypothalamic-pituitary gland tumors, but meningiomas and some other ones. The benign is not fine, and that I love is now this terminology that you hear. And I think it's really important that people understand this because what can happen. Oh, well, it's not malignant, so they're fine. But they're not, because they still have a brain tumor, and it's still, again, like I said before, it's still the brain. It is the motherboard of all that we are and who we are and our capabilities. So yeah, I've met with people in the community. They're incredible, I will say. I've met with some patients in the community. A couple of people whose loved ones have died. Their adult children have died from this disease. And then, of course, the caregiver group that I helped facilitate recently filled in for Eugenia, which, gosh, what an honor that was. And I learned so much from these parents. And it touches my heart so deeply because they're the greatest advocates on behalf of their children. But they talk about, and I brought up grief in that group, and talk about the grief of diagnosis. You have your child, and it's unimaginable. You have this child and you're pregnant, or whether it's adopted, whatever that is, and you're excited to have this baby, and then this baby comes and things seem to be okay and normal, whatever that means, right? And then all of a sudden, symptoms start appearing. And this was the stories that I was hearing, that symptoms would come, but nobody knew what it was, and they were dismissed by doctors. And so you've got all of this confusion, and then bam, your child has a craniopharyngioma. Your child has this. It's not malignant, though. So it's like, okay. So what does that mean? So where's the grief in that? First of all, the grief is, again, that blindsidedness that we all feel when a loved one or a patient themselves is diagnosed with something. I call it whiplash. It's like, got to get your footing. And as I mentioned earlier, parents have dreams, hopes, and expectations for their children and what lives are going to look like as a parent and what parenting is going to be like and all the fun and cute stuff that your kids are going to do and what they're going to grow up to be and who will they be. And sometimes we make plans that we shouldn't make for our children as opposed to stepping back, whether it's a child with a brain tumor or just a child that remains healthy throughout their entire lives. But a diagnosis like that changes everything. And so some of the grief is fear. The grief is, what does this mean for my kid? What are the treatments going to be? How is the treatment going to change them? What is this illness going to do to them? Will they be different? Will they look different? Because we know that because of the sodium and certain treatments, steroids and all sorts of things that do change the way they appear, right? And I remember this even with Stephen, the steroids, the puffy face, the puffy belly. There are a couple of people that talk about how their children lost their sight and trying to navigate all of that. That's exhausting. It's exhausting. Grief is exhausting. Caregiving is exhausting. And just finding your way, and it's ongoing. Caring for your child, you don't get a reprieve. You don't get to walk away. You live with this every day and every night. And so finding a way, as I said, navigate is the best way I think of to put it, to navigate that journey. And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, boy, right? It just keeps on going. But holding space for your grief, letting yourself sit there, right? Because you're going to have people say, like I said before, but it's benign. But at least, right? The at least it's, but I love the at least part, that, bright siding stuff. At least it's benign. At least at least they won't die from this. At least, at least, at least. Okay. If you're listening and you have a friend whose child has this disease, please remove at least from your vocabulary. It's a little invalidating and negates all the feelings that come up on a regular basis.
It really does. It's something we as a foundation are really focused on right now because I think it is such a misnomer among not only, even our clinician partners don't want to hear about, oh, it's just benign tumor. This and I'll speak to this because, I've been in this journey now for 10 years, and the grief, I don't know if it comes and goes or just is always there in the background, and I've learned to like live with it. But most recently it's a rare occasion that I socialize much anymore because I guard myself a little. I was around a group of people and they're all talking about their kids and their kids starting college and their kids, and their summer jobs and their kids and their girlfriends or boyfriends and all of that stuff. And that is where I start to feel the grief. So it pops up in those circumstances. And so I don't have, I try to smile and go with it, but I think it's like those little, I don't think people really outside of our situation or our experiences really understand that like those little regular things in life can just like surface those emotions. And so it's like figuring out, well, do I just avoid those situations altogether? Or do I push myself into them and then over time just get used to it and let it? So it's just those kinds of things that, like, you're always sort of negotiating in this process.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's finding your safe people, right? Finding the people that you can truly be who you are with and that are going to be able to just sit in that space with you. Right. Because you're saying people going off to college, people, making the cheerleading team and playing baseball. And, you think, will my kid ever play baseball? Will I be able to throw a ball? I could talk about people when they lose their sight. How will I be able to help them move through their world? How are they going to be accepted in their world? They're going to go to school. Are they going to need like, an IEP? Are they going to need a special education plan? Are kids going to make fun of them? Are kids going to shun them? Are kids going to be nice to them? Who's going to be their friend? There is so many layers for parents caring for a child with a disease, and certainly a disease like a brain tumor.
100%.
Yeah.
Um, so you've been working one-on-one with caregivers and patients with us for a little while now, and also some support groups. And I just wanted to ask you, what can someone expect? Maybe they're thinking about signing up for a session, or they might consider joining a grief support group when we restart those. What can they expect from it if they're a little nervous about getting involved in that?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you. I want to say first that it takes a lot of courage to seek support. Not everybody is comfortable, and yet they do it anyway. So if you're somebody who is looking for support and finding it, pat yourself on the back. Whether you go to a group, whether you work one-on-one with somebody, whether it's me or anybody, good for you for doing that. Because I know it's not always easy to ask for help because you don't know what it's going to look like. And if it's something you're not used to doing, because you're so used to taking care of everybody else, you don't take the time for yourself. Good for you. High five. Truly high five yourself in the mirror for that. So working with me one-on-one or in the group, we'll start with the one-on-ones that I've been doing for you. It's conversational. Tell me, and usually I say, so how are you in this moment? because grief ebbs and flows. And you were sort of mentioning, sometimes you don't, are you still in grief or you're not? And it just is an ebb and flow. And sometimes grief, we grow around the grief, and sometimes we sort of close in on the grief. So my first thing is always, how are you in this moment? And that sort of starts the conversation. Well, in this moment, either I'm okay or I'm really having a hard time. Sometimes they start crying, and it's so interesting how people will tend to apologize for crying, right? We do that, don't we? And I find, and it's not gender specific, but I do find women do more like this, like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like we wave our hands, like, I'm sorry. And men will just say, I'm sorry, forgive me for crying. So I have a rule in any group that I do and with clients that I work with or anybody I chat with, even if I'm in Target and run into somebody and their eyes fill up and they say, I'm sorry. I say, you're not allowed, here's my rule, you're not allowed to apologize for crying. Your tears are welcome here. And it's a testament to how you feel about your person. And you deserve to cry, and it's okay. And it is a release for you, and it's important. Now, I want to just add to that, maybe you're not a crier. That's okay too. You don't have to be crying. Like I hear people who are grieving think, I don't know, I haven't cried. I just can't seem to cry. It's like, that's okay. Maybe that's not your grief style right now. I had somebody join a support group, and it wasn't the one I do for you, a different one. And she was a young woman. Her parent had just died, and she was crying. And she said her mother had been, I think, gone like a month or so, month or 2 months. And she said, this is the first time I've cried because it was a safe space, right? That communal grieving. So I'm very open, and I'm quite emphatic, and they all know this about me now, to not apologize for crying. So sometimes there are tears, and we talk about, what are the tears? What are the tears feeling like? Where are you feeling it? Where are you feeling your grief? Where in your body is it sitting? And people say different things, my heart, my stomach, my neck, and I do some movement with them. We'll do some meditation, putting your hands where you're feeling the grief the most and sending some love to it. And sometimes I'll do a little activity with them. We'll talk about secondary losses, which are, you have your primary loss and then the losses that ripple out, almost the domino effect of that loss. Sometimes we just sit. Sometimes there's no conversation for a couple minutes, and that's okay. It's important to let someone who is grieving sit for a few minutes, because sometimes it's hard to get the words out. Sometimes it's hard to find the words. Concentration and focus is harder when you're grieving. So that's just a little nugget of how the sessions go. In a group, it's going to be a little different because there are a lot more people. So in a group, it's the same thing. If someone wants to talk, how are you doing in this moment? Always the same, or how are you doing this evening? Same question, and then whatever comes up. I will always say, would you like some guidance? Would you like some feedback? They always say yes, but I always say, you don't have to be polite. You're not going to hurt my feelings, right? It's not the Holly show. I'm here for you. And I always encourage the group to say, if you have something you want to share with them, feel free to do that. Either it's in a chat, or we can just raise your hand. We can just all have this beautiful, loving conversation. I witnessed it with the caregiver group. It was a phenomenal experience, how they all just supported each other. The one thing I always do when I start a group, in any group I do, is I say, we all have experienced either the loss or the diagnosis, depending what the group is, of a loved one with a brain tumor. But here's what we can't say, what I would never say, and I don't say to anybody, is, I know how you feel. Because your grief is unique to you, your experience is unique to you, even if it's similar to the person in the next Zoom box next to you. And your relationship to your loved one is unique to you. So nobody can say, I know how you feel. Because again, that can be very negating. I know how you feel, so yeah, okay. Because we all experience things differently. And we all want to be able to have that opportunity to share that feeling. I don't know if I know I've experienced this. I don't know if you've experienced this, Amy, with, when Stephen died, or when Stephen died. Oh, I know how you feel when my husband died, or I know how you feel when my dog died, or my grandmother died. And
Yeah.
all those losses are valid, and all those losses are difficult, pet loss, whatever it is. But we can't compare our losses, because we all grieve at 100%. And we're all going to have different kind of experiences with that.
No, it's true because we also, I often caution people when they join our support groups, and even when they start to sort of, you know, form relationships within the brain within our community, that no, I've never seen two craniopharyngioma survivors have the same path. Like there's no two very exact same courses after this, or even, any of the hypothalamic tumors that we work with. And so, comparison is not applicable in grief and even just the journey itself. The best thing we can do is kind of, be there for each other, and it's just nice to know. I think it's always nice to know someone gets it. And by get it, I mean really like has been in this path, because I think it's really hard to understand. Like you said, nobody can know how this feels unless you have experienced it firsthand.
And there's something about community. Like I say, the
Hmm.
communal space, whether you have a similar but different experience,
Yeah,
but you're part of something. Because like I said earlier, it's so isolating.
it is.
It can be
Hmm.
so isolating. And to feel like you're part of something and somebody, like you say, gets it. They may
Yeah.
not get it 1,000,000%, but they get a part of it. And
Hmm.
that's really important. I mean, what I always say when I say to people, no one can say they know how you feel. I won't say I know how you feel, but what I can say and what your people can say is I know how it feels for me. Right? I know how it felt for me when Stephen was diagnosed. I know what it felt like when he died. And I know what it still feels like. A little over 14 and a half years later since he's been gone. It's been 16 and a half years since diagnosis, 14 and a half years since he's been gone. And I know what it still feels like for me. But I can't possibly know what it's like for the other person on the other side of the screen.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, so many great points, because from benign is not, fine, and just the like, um, when the outside world is like, oh, but he's doing great. And I'm like, if you had an idea of what our day to day is
Right.
like.
And when you think like, with the kids with the craniopharyngiomas, I mean, sometimes they don't sleep through the night,
Mhm.
like they're up a lot. And so you could be up the entire night and then you're off doing your work, you're going to work or you're doing whatever. And be like, oh, it's so great to see you. Can we get lunch? Like lunch. I mean, I think about your community and I think about the parents and I said, they're just a really remarkably special group of people. And I know it's not the remarkably special they want to be. It's not, right? It's not what they signed up for as parents. And yet, you do what you got to do. And it's really hard, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing to see. And I find myself, I feel very blessed to be surrounded by like this. So obviously none of these jobs I signed up for, the caregiving, this
Right.
gig. But I find really, it's such a blessing to be around, and see and interact with these parents, these caregivers, these survivors who have risen to an occasion or risen to a situation that is like unimaginable to someone. If you had presented this scenario to me and said, hey, this is might be the life that you live, like I would be like, that's not even possible. And it's just amazing to see, like, just and in all the corners, the blessings that come out of this, people like you, that work with our community, just being able to kind of hold each other up. It's amazing, but it's a lot.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, who would have thought when your child was born that you would be creating the Raymond A. Wood Foundation?
oh, right.
Like, I mean, that wasn't on your radar at all. Like, who would have thought I'd become a grief specialist, right? That
Yeah.
wasn't on your radar at all. Yeah.
No.
And look what you did. Like,
Mhm.
look what you're
Yeah,
doing
and
for your community. It's just, again, mm,
thank you. I think, much like you, it's just I'm a solutions oriented person. So give me a problem and I'll fight my way to a solution. This one's a really tough one, but I'll keep working at it.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
keep chipping away. So I think just like, you're going to join us in November for our conference
I
to
am.
even talk further about this. So tell me a little bit about, what people can expect to hear from you there. Will they have an opportunity to talk with you, a little bit one-on-one, and maybe just, why they should come to meet you at the conference. So just a little shameless plug too.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what you can expect if you're coming to the conference, and I know a lot of people are, and I hope you will. Not even just for me, I hope you'll go because again, you can be part of this community. If you're living in a neighborhood or a city where you're the only person with a child with this disease, you're going to be surrounded by people. You're going to be surrounded by other parents. You're going to be surrounded by the medical community, which they're going to give you information. You're going to be just surrounded by so much love and support and information, which is important. So what you're going to get with me is we're going to have, a conversation. I'm very conversational. We'll talk, or I will share about what is grief, and especially the non-death loss grief, which is the diagnosis of a disease. And we'll talk about that anticipatory grief. And some people get thrown by the word anticipatory, like, I don't want to anticipate someone's death. That's not what I mean. It's the anticipation of what is it all going to look like. We can also call it diagnosis grief if that feels more comfortable. I always like to be mindful of, different people's language and how they receive words. But talking about that, what does this look like? What does this feel like? What's the hard stuff? When do you feel the most seen? When do you feel the least seen? Because that's the biggest thing that anybody who's grieving anything is they just want to be seen. And so my role, and I'll be there the whole weekend. I'll be arriving Friday and I will be there. I'll speak on Sunday, but I'll be around the whole weekend, is that you feel seen, that you know that I see you and that I support you and I am hearing you. And I want to hear your stories and I want to answer all your questions. We'll do Q&As. What do you want to know? Maybe you want to know how to respond to people when they say something that isn't helpful. I say people are well-intentioned most of the time, but they're so misinformed. And how can I help you to respond in a way that is true to you? So it's not Holly speak, but your speak, but also that you feel like you're not disrespecting their care. Right? People say, well, they mean well, but inside you want to say something, but you don't know exactly how to put it together. I'll help you do that. I'll help you find a way to respond to people when they say, but they're doing so well. Well, they look great. Well, it's benign. Or, and I'm sure many of you have heard this one. Oh, I can't imagine. I feel so blessed that my kid is healthy. And you want to say, well, today, your kid's healthy today, right? And it's also a little insulting. It's a little, like, again, the word invalidating. It's hurtful. So helping you find some language for that, but also language for yourself and even how to talk to your kids or maybe other people's kids. And normalizing grief. Normalizing that grief is the natural response to a life event that may feel like a loss. And it doesn't have to be death. A diagnosis is a loss. It is a loss of your plans. And it's not plans for the future. Maybe it's the immediate plans in that moment. It's all of that. And you get to feel it. And that's the point. I'm going to let you feel it and be in it. Maybe we'll do a couple of activities if there's time. I have some worksheets that I'll be bringing or sending to Amy to bring. And I'll also be available throughout the weekend. I'll be hanging out. Come and find me. If you want to just chat, pull me aside and go sit someplace and just have a one-on-one. Take advantage of my time with you all because that's what I'm there for.
Amazing, Holly. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today and taking the time. And we're looking forward to continuing the conversation in November. And we will also be posting time openings for your grief support one-on-one sessions, but also we'll probably be opening up a group maybe later this year into the next year. So thank you again for being with us
Thank
and
you.
for for supporting our community. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your foundation. And it's an honor every time I get to meet with people and meet with you. So thank you.